along with a kind of spoonful of sugar, you needed a kind of stiff poke up the back with a sharp instrument.
Trump says peace is close. I mean, he's had a lot to say this week, hasn't he? You've heard it on Times Radio. He's been discussing Greenland, sort of ranting a bit about that, to be honest. He's announced his board of peace. He's been talking about Afghanistan and making, frankly, ignorant comments about the coalition of troops, including UK troops, and their willingness, or in his view, it would seem unwillingness, to be on the front line in Afghanistan, which is just factually ignorant and inaccurate. He's also been telling European leaders they'd be speaking German if it wasn't for the Americans. As Kate and Stig observed, he said that in Switzerland, where they speak German. It feels as if the global order, the way things are meant to work, will never be the same again, even after President Trump departs the scene. Let's talk to Sir Simon Schama, historian, for a bit of perspective, I suppose, Sir Simon, on the week that's been. Good morning to you.
Hello.
Well, a pleasure to speak to you. And I suppose we're emerging out of this Davos summit, which was so dominated by the gravitational pull of President Trump, to consider where, first of all, I think where the UK stand, because we've traditionally been a bridge between the US and Europe. And I just wonder how you would now characterise the UK's role in this evolving transatlantic relationship.
Well, I think actually much of the commentary has it pretty much right about Keir Starmer going from a kind of softly policy, the sense in which if you set out things reasonably, if you supplied a kind of morning tablespoonful of flattery, you could get things done with Donald Trump. And I think what changed there was that you wanted really, along with a kind of spoonful of sugar, you needed a kind of stiff poke up the back with a sharp instrument. I say that everybody responded. I think my impression is to Mark Carney's speech has been talked about. The other great speech, important, fierce speech, was that, of course, of Zelensky's yesterday. But the sense is really that tactically, you might try and handle Trump's extraordinary kind of postures, his, as you rightly put it, ignorance, his sense of being able to get away with things by catering to his ego just enough without actually selling your own interest short. That now has to be accompanied by a very stiff dose of reality, the reality being that America is no longer an ally. I mean, I know it is technically an ally, but Trump really has set his marks on enfeebling one organization, NATO essentially, and destroying the European Union. It's very important to remember that Trump said many times over, Trump, the historian, has claimed that the European Union, its earlier versions, the steel and coal community, was founded deliberately in order to screw the United States of America. So he's always hated it. He's always resented the notion that somehow it's managed to defraud the world without pulling above or even at its weight. So this was the coldest of cold showers possible, but again, in the spirit of Mark Carney. And I will have to say, actually, that there was really, for a historian or for anybody else, for you, true, Calum, the difference in tone between the public address of someone like Mark Carney, or indeed someone like Zelensky, and the kind of lazy, repetitive, obsessive, ignorant, meretricious, idiotic, ranting ramble that Trump produced is a kind of actual symptom of how they behave in the world of power. You had one of the kind of egomaniacal, easy target real estate developer, and the other was the voice of great rhetoric, of Cicero, of Churchill, of Charles de Gaulle, and so on. So, power is an immense, mighty, and in the nuclear age, ferociously dangerous thing. And here it treated really by someone who just tells lie after lie. Well, I really won the election of 2020. China has no wind farms. Was a kind of horrifying but sobering, shall we say, experience.
Let's relive some of that contrast, actually, just as we're speaking to you, Sir Simon. I want to just play a bit of Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, who, as you've outlined, really sort of delivered a whole range of home truths about the world as we should now recognise it, and indeed a warning against remaining mute in the face of an increasingly unreliable United States. Here's Mark Carney.
Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
So just some of Mark Carney there. I wonder, Sir Simon, as well, if we should consider, in light of what you were just saying, whether the special relationship is dead or whether at least it needs a rebrand. We can't escape the fact that the US threatened to invade a NATO ally in the last few days. That is the reality of what we're dealing with here. Should the special relationship be rebranded? Should we stop using that phrase?
Well, I would say rebooting rather than rebranding, really. It's always not a very absolutely clear thing about what the special relationship was, although you can look historically, of course, to it being enacted in immensely powerful and benevolent way. I'm thinking of Lend-Lease, when Roosevelt, despite bitter opposition in the United States to America having anything to do with the European war or facing up to Hitler, did nonetheless have a close relationship with Churchill, and of course, crucially supplied Britain with the munitions which helped it at one point, stand entirely alone against Hitler and the war. So there's a sort of sense in which it would be, what are we going to do? What is the United Kingdom going to do? Saying, this was actually the one thing that people picked up, that they worried about what Carney said, and particularly what Carney did when he seemed to be so close to China, really. Are you really going to kind of maneuver so far away from the United States that you're actually going to... you're going to see the United States as someone who automatically lines up with China and Russia. It's quite true that Donald Trump speaks and behaves and conducts public diplomacy in a more hospitable way with those two autocratic powers. He's in love. He's what P.G. Wodehouse had a wonderful name for the kind of comic spat fascist in one of his Jeeves stories, when he called Roderick Spode an amateur dictator. And sometimes when I want to cheer myself up, I think that Donald Trump is also a kind of amateur dictator. He doesn't quite know what he's doing after he's said it. No, I think it's very important to sort of switch perspectives a bit, Calum, into the real prospects of what happens domestically in America. Yeah. We're in 2026. It's extremely likely, not guaranteed, that the Democrats will actually achieve a majority in the House in the midterm elections in November. That does change a huge amount the functioning, the chairmanship of committees. It's also the case, which has not been commented on, this is maybe the first time it is, that actually the Board of Peace cannot be, in American law or the Constitution, self-constituted. Rather like the founding of the League of Nations and the Treaty of Versailles, it requires a 2/3 majority of the Senate, which Donald Trump will not get. They will argue, of course, that the Board of Peace is not a treaty, that it's simply, what is it then? Is it a real estate development corporations, board meeting of that kind?
And so does that render it impotent, Simon?
Exactly.
Right.
So, and also, even though Donald Trump yesterday said, they want me to run for a fourth time, however conservative the Supreme Court is, there is no possibility, you heard it here, no possibility of Donald Trump having another term in 2028. So you have to draw a breath. To ditch the special relationship entirely would mean to have an extremely short-term view of where power really lies in the United States. His approval ratings are absolutely in the basement right now.
I can't help but wonder, though, if looking forward, that Donald Trump redefines how a presidency operates, and whether his sort of stamp your feet to try and get things done will be attractive even to potential future more liberal presidents, that they may even be inspired by Trump's approach, breaking with convention and setting new precedents that they can then buy into and lean into in the future.
Well, you've hit on an absolutely crucial point, perfect point, really, Calum, because let's take one of the ways in which Donald Trump has really violated the Constitution, essentially turning the Department of Justice into a kind of personal force of prosecution and enforcement. Will it be tempting? Will it be tempting actually to deploy that on behalf of, democratic presidency? You absolutely, really hope not. But let's say, the creation of a kind of paramilitary force in the case of the excesses of ICE, then I'm sure will be pulled back without going back to a policy is said to keep open borders and be lax about the enforcement of deporting criminal immigrants. That's not what's happening under. I thought, again, another voice of clarity, although extremely, extremely angry, was Gavin Newsom, who was denied his initial place to speak at Davos and then got everything off his chest in a kind of admirable warrior-like way. Look, another crucial point, hello, fellow historians, is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence coming up this July. Anyone who's read it, I'm sure you two have read it word by word,
Yep.
will know that a very important part of that was the fierce objection to, quote, the quartering of troops among civilian populations. So this is a possibility, even though sort of Donald Trump's view of history is sort of a mixture of idiocy, lies, and sentimentality and self-congratulation. Nonetheless, it will be an absolutely prime moment to decide whether or not the true America, the America that really existed between George Washington and Franklin Roosevelt and on through the presidencies of Truman and Kennedy and Ronald Reagan, still survives. And even though inflation is always at the top of the list, and cost of living and affordability and those things, my hunch is that there'll be a very profound debate to actually return America to what has been thought of as America's moral as well as simply power standing in the world. I certainly hope so, of course.
Indeed. Sir Simon Schama, what a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Great to have you on. Sir Simon Schama, the historian there.